Cold open, a whisper like breath scraping across dry wood. A single lantern swings in a dark corridor. In 1851, in a Memphis auction house built of red cypress and rotting prayer books, a man appeared who should not have existed. He had no origin, no record, no scars of labor, only a beauty so unnatural that witnesses later refused to speak his name. 3 days after his sale, every person who saw him vanished. Static hiss. The lantern snaps out. In this film, we unravel the seal. Doff ledger of Lot 77, a young man whose impossible presence became an unspeakable obsession for planters, preachers, and physicians, before the city quietly erased all evidence he had ever been alive. What you are about to hear was never meant for public record. It was buried behind church walls, suppressed by families whose names still hold power, and guarded by institutions terrified of what his existence implied. We begin not with myth, but with the place where the truth first tore open, the Anderson Lodge Slave Exchange, one of the largest in the Mississippi Valley. The building itself was a machine of suffering. 3 floors of tight rooms, barred windows, and the damp heat of human bodies waiting to be priced. But the core of our investigation isn't simply the brutality of the system. It's what slipped through that system, what defied its logic. This is the story of a man described as too perfect, too calm, too silent, and too familiar, as though each viewer felt they recognized him from somewhere inside their own memory. And this is the story of how Memphis tried and failed to forget him. In 1934, during renovation of a condemned church orphanage in East Memphis, workers discovered a rusted iron box sealed with pitch. Inside were pages too delicate to touch. Archivists later stabilized them, but the church insisted they be transferred to a restricted facility in Jackson. For decades, the box remained locked. Only in 1989 did an anonymous historian leak photographs of a single document, a slave exchange ledger entry dated March 3, 1851. The line item was unlike any other. Lot 77, male, IST, age 19, condition, unmarred, face, unaccountably symmetrical, eyes, gray, reflective, behavior, silent, compliant, notes, do not inspect closely, limit handling, sale recommended within 72 hours. Below the notes were 3 initials, each belonging to powerful Memphis families whose descendants still silently fund local churches. But what alarmed researchers was not the language, it was the faint, nearly erased line written sideways. The others reacted again tonight, could not calm the infants, keep him away from the nursery. The nursery referenced an upstairs room of the orphanage where abandoned and enslaved infants were kept before transport. Records show the babies experienced episodes of simultaneous screaming, fits that stopped only when Lot 77 was moved farther away. The church called these pages forgeries. City historians dismissed them as embellished fabrications. But the paper type, ink formulation, and handwriting style all matched other verified documents from the period. Why would an auction supervisor in 1851 warn buyers not to inspect a slave's face closely? Why imply that children reacted to him as if recognizing something adults could not? Why urge rapid sale? The ledger didn't answer these questions. It only opened the door to more. On the fog-clouded morning of March 1, 1851, a wagon pulled up to the Anderson Lodge Exchange. Witnesses, 2 clerks and a street vendor, later described the same unsettling detail. The driver refused to turn around and look behind him, even as he delivered the new human cargo. Inside the wagon sat 4 men in chains. 3 were gaunt, exhausted, and visibly injured, consistent with long transit under brutal conditions, but the 4th sat perfectly still, no swelling, no rope burns, no travel dust. His posture held a strange composure, shoulders evenly aligned, breathing slow, gaze fixed forward. The vendor recalled, he looked like someone pretending to be human, or someone who had forgotten how. The clerks processed the first 3 men without incident. But upon reaching the 4th, Clerk Nathaniel Croft noted a sensation he compared to the pressure that comes before a storm, but inside my skull. His hand shook so violently he miswrote the man's age. When he tried to correct the error, the pen tip snapped. Yet Lot 77 remained utterly expressionless. He was measured, weighed, examined, but physicians remarked that his pulse was strange. Too slow, too steady. No trembling, no sweat, no evidence of recent hardship, as if he had simply been placed there moments earlier. Croft wrote privately that his skin felt unnaturally warm. Another employee insisted the man's eye color shifted subtly depending on who stood closest. The exchange master ordered him isolated, claiming buyers might misread his condition. But the real reason, as we later learn, was far more disturbing. Within 24 hours, 2 workers who inspected Lot 77 reported sleep paralysis and vivid dreams of an empty shoreline. A third refused to enter his room at all. He would not speak his name, he would not speak anything, and somehow he seemed to be waiting. The strangest account from this period comes not from clerks or doctors, but from the Reverend Elias Wren, choirmaster of the nearby St. Brigid's Seminary. In a sermon notebook dated March 1851, found decades later in an attic, Wren describes visiting the exchange to purchase laborers for the seminary grounds. He wrote, "Upon entering the holding room, I felt something akin to standing too near a great bell, a vibration behind the ribs. The Lord has not made men who create such a sensation, or if he has, they are not meant for trade." Wren reported seeing Lot 77 sitting slightly apart from the others, chains slack around his wrists, as though they had been sized incorrectly. When Wren approached, the young man looked directly at him. Wren collapsed. Witnesses confirmed the Reverend fell without warning. He later claimed he had heard a sound like a hymn sung backward, with each note pulling me toward a vast hollow place. The seminary quickly dismissed the story. Yet the same notebook contains a sketch, an eerily accurate drawing of the young man with a single line written beneath. "He is not a soul to be saved. He is a memory returning." What memory? To whom? Why would a reverend, deeply committed to the doctrine of souls, redemption, and divine hierarchy, declare that a young enslaved man was outside all categories of salvation? More troubling still, Wren returned to the seminary and ordered the boys' dormitory windows nailed shut. He forbade the choir from singing minor harmonics. He burned 3 hymnals. He never explained why. 3 nights later, students began reporting sleepwalking episodes. All walked in the same direction, toward the river. All stopped at the exact same point, an embankment known for ferry landings. One whispered a name he should not have known, 77. Something about the man was spreading, and no one could understand how. The Anderson Lodge Exchange kept a contracted physician on site, Dr. Ambrose Tilling. His journal, preserved by family descendants, contains one of the earliest medical descriptions of Lot 77, although the doctor later denied writing certain passages. On March 2nd, he examined the young man. What he recorded was clinically impossible. Temperature, consistently warm, as though heated by an inner coal. Heart rate, 40 beats per minute, yet he is alert. Reflexes, delayed in some areas, exaggerated in others, as though responding to stimuli I cannot perceive. Eyes reflective, no sign of cataract, but depth suggests layering, like looking into water over stone. Scars none, not even childhood injuries. Skin reads as erased. But the most chilling entry comes near the page's margin. He looked at me as though checking what I had become. Tilling reported an overwhelming sense that Lot 77 recognized him, deeply, intimately, despite their never having met. The doctor's hands shook so violently that he spilled tincture on the floor. When he excused himself to breathe, he found his assistant weeping silently in the hallway. 2 hours later, Tilling attempted a second examination with 3 staff members present, but they refused to enter the room. That night, Tilling went home and locked himself in his bedroom. His wife later testified that he muttered phrases in his sleep. "It's not a man, the shape is wrong, and he remembers us." Over the following days, Tilling increasingly avoided the exchange. He drank heavily and told colleagues he felt observed by something that has not yet opened its eyes. A week later, he resigned, Within a year he was institutionalized. His family never spoke of 1851 again. If Lot 77 unsettled the staff, he captivated potential buyers. Within days, whispers of an unnaturally beautiful young man began circulating among wealthy planters, physicians, and businessmen, but the descriptions varied wildly. One buyer claimed his features were angelic. Another said predatory. Another insisted he resembled someone I lost long ago. The only consistent element, every viewer felt drawn to him, as if his presence filled a gap they had never acknowledged. The buyer's circle, an informal network of elite men who controlled much of Memphis's economy, began pushing for a private showing. They wanted exclusivity. They wanted secrecy. And some, historians believe, wanted to investigate the strange reports of psychological disturbance surrounding him. An exchange clerk later wrote, "They looked at him not as property, but as if trying to decode him." During the private viewing, several buyers asked probing questions. Where had he come from? What ship? What broker? What plantation? Every inquiry hit a dead end. No transport manifest listed him. No subordinate remembered receiving him. No one had witnessed his arrival but the wagon driver, who avoided the topic and left town 2 days later. The buyers began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to bid immediately. Others insisted he was a liability, too strange, too flawless, too likely to attract rumors. In an unprecedented move, the exchange master decided to auction him quietly, without public announcement. But by then, something peculiar had already occurred. One buyer's teenage son had gone missing, the same boy who had secretly snuck into the holding rooms the night before, the same boy who reportedly whispered, "He looks like my brother," a brother who had died years earlier. The circle should have halted the sale, but greed and curiosity won. The auction of Lot 77 was scheduled for March 4th behind closed doors. Attendance was restricted to a dozen prominent men, no women. No clergy, no staff beyond 2 guards. The room was oppressively warm. Witnesses described the air as thick, humming like insects inside the walls. Lot 77 was brought forward in chains, but walked effortlessly, almost serenely. He did not scan the room. He looked only at the floor, as though listening rather than seeing. The bidding began. A planter from Mississippi offered $2,000, far above typical prices for young enslaved men. Another offered $3,200, a third raised to $4,500, but before the auction master could strike the gavel, Lot 77 finally spoke. His first words, his only recorded words, he looked up, met the planter's eyes, and said, "You do not know whose shape you wear." Every witness froze. Some staggered backward. One vomited. His voice was calm, but layered, as though multiple tones spoke at once. The auction master demanded silence. Lot 77 lowered his gaze again. Bidding resumed, shakier now, but determined. The final price reached $5,800, an astronomical sum. The winning bidder, Thaddeus Bell, owner of a large plantation in Fayette County and longtime member of the buyer's circle. But when the gavel struck, the lanterns in the room went out. All at once, total darkness, screams followed, not from fear, but from confusion. Men swore they felt something brush past them. Others said they heard breathing that was not human. When lights were restored, Lot 77 was still standing in place, but the auction master was gone. His chair lay overturned, his ledger smeared with ink, and a strange wet trail led toward the rear door, then disappeared. Bell insisted the sale proceed despite the disappearance. It would be the last decision he ever made freely. Bell ordered 2 men to transport Lot 77 by wagon to his plantation, Briar Hollow. The journey should have taken 2 hours. Instead, it took nearly 5. Driver Samuel Kedge later testified that the horses balked repeatedly. At one point, they refused to move entirely, shaking as though sensing a predator. The men whipped them, shouted, prayed, but the animals only calmed when Lot 77 leaned forward and whispered something inaudible. Once they reached the narrow road leading to Briar Hollow, Kedge noticed an unsettling detail. The birds had gone silent. Even insects seemed absent. He wrote, It was as though the land itself was holding its breath. Lot 77 remained perfectly still for most of the trip, but approximately halfway through, he turned to Kedge and asked, "Do you hear them?" Kedge replied he heard nothing. The young man whispered, "They remember you." Kedge refused to elaborate on this statement for the rest of his life. When they finally reached Bell's property, his wife Miriam came to the porch. Upon seeing Lot 77, she gasped, not in shock, but in recognition. She later claimed he resembled a childhood friend who drowned decades earlier. Bell dismissed her reaction, ordering that the man be housed in a small outbuilding and assigned light domestic duties. But that first night, every worker in the slave quarters reported the same dream: a shoreline at dusk, with a figure standing ankle deep in water, face blurred, hands open as if beckoning. By dawn, 2 infants in the quarters were found crying inconsolably, both staring toward the outbuilding where Lot 77 slept. Bell's overseer recommended selling the young man immediately. Bell refused. The next morning, the plantation's youngest children, both enslaved and free, began behaving strangely around Lot 77. When he walked past the slave quarters, toddlers reached out to him, not in fear, but familiarity, like recognizing a parent long absent. Some tried to follow him. One whispered a name that did not belong to any man on the plantation: Asher. Bell beat the boy for lying, but the child insisted he hadn't learned the word, he had remembered it. Children around the estate began drawing the same image in the dirt: a tall figure with elongated shadows stretching toward a shoreline, always dusk. When questioned, they said the drawings showed the man before he had a face. Miriam Bell grew increasingly terrified. She watched Lot 77 from a distance and claimed his reflection in the laundry house window was delayed, turning a second after his body moved. When she told her husband, he struck her and forbade her from speaking nonsense. That night she wrote in her private diary, "He is beautiful like something unfinished, like a statue that knows it will one day breathe." More disturbingly, the children know him, not as a stranger, but as a returned memory. By midweek, the plantation's nursemaid reported infants refusing milk unless positioned facing the shack where Lot 77 slept. Older children woke with sleep, bruises on their knees, as though kneeling for hours. Half of them remembered nothing. The other half remembered a voice whispering, "You belong to me before you belong to them." The Bell family insisted the children were acting out, but adults across the property began reporting dreams identical to the children's. The shoreline, the figure, the beckoning hands, something old was awakening, and it was using memory as its instrument. Concerned by the unrest, Bell ordered his overseer to investigate Lot 77's origins. No expense spared. Letters were sent to New Orleans, Charleston, Richmond, and Norfolk, every major port associated with the slave trade. Bell believed the man's beauty, symmetry, and strange effect on others might signify valuable lineage. Perhaps he was mixed race, perhaps he was foreign royalty, perhaps some deformity or rare condition explained the uncanny influence he held over people. Weeks passed, responses trickled in, all identical. No ship had transported a man matching his description, no auction house recorded him, no broker claimed him. One broker wrote, "Your description recalls an old superstition, but I trust you seek facts, not nightmares." But the letters grew stranger. Some brokers admitted that men with similar descriptions had appeared occasionally across decades, but were never traceable afterward. Some vanished, some were freed abruptly. One died, but his body decomposed impossibly fast within hours. A coastal physician wrote, "Beauty of that order is not a blessing, it is a sign." Another letter spoke of a West African myth, spirits that entered human shape not by birth, but by imitation, spirits that mimicked the dead, spirits that wandered inland searching for people who remembered them from another life. Bell burned that letter. But the final correspondence, written by a former ship surgeon, was the most disturbing. "If he is what you describe, do not keep him near the children, do not let him learn their names, and do not, under any circumstance, stare into his eyes for longer than a breath." Bell scoffed. Called the warning superstition, his overseer begged him to reconsider, Bell refused. Soon the plantation began to rot, animals falling sick, workers sleepwalking, the forest line creeping unnaturally close. And Lot 77 remained calm, as though quietly waiting for something he always knew would happen. In April, something strange began at the tree line behind Briar Hollow. Workers swore the woods looked closer, at first by inches, then by feet. Saplings appeared overnight where none had been. Dead branches littered the ground, but no storm had passed. Some claimed they heard whispering from the trees. Others swore they felt watched. The Bell family insisted people were imagining things. Then came the night of the movement. Around midnight, screams erupted from the slave quarters. Workers fled their cabins, pointing toward the forest. Witnesses later described seeing entire sections of trees swaying in perfect unison, despite windless air, as though something huge was pushing through them. Lot 77 walked out of his shack and stood barefoot in the dirt, staring silently at the woods. One woman claimed his shadow stretched far longer than natural, reaching toward the forest line. Bell demanded the overseer investigate. The man refused. That night, several individuals reported hearing rhythmic thumping beneath the ground, as if something enormous was walking below the soil. And then they heard the sound that would haunt survivors forever. Children laughing, dozens of them, coming from inside the woods. But all the plantation children were accounted for. The laughter did not fade until dawn. When the sun rose, footprints were found at the forest edge, small, barefoot prints, but they led nowhere, no paths, no breaks. It was as though the children had walked straight into the trees and vanished. Bell blamed Lot 77, but the young man simply turned to him and said, "You brought me to the place where the remembering is strongest." Bell struck him, his hand bruised. Lot 77 remained unmarked. Miriam Bell, once proud and composed, began unraveling as the season turned. She stopped attending church. She wandered the house at night. Servants found her standing motionless in the nursery, staring at her own children as though uncertain of their identity. She insisted Lot 77 was changing their faces, though the children looked perfectly normal to everyone else. Her diary entries grew increasingly fragmented. "He looks like people I miss. He looks like people I fear. His eyes are a door. My children recognize him, they shouldn't." She described waking from dreams with her pillow soaked, not with sweat, but with river water. She claimed the smell of silt filled the bedroom each night. At one point she wrote, "I went to check on him. He was already standing behind me." Servants insisted Miriam never left her room. But the most disturbing entry read, "He whispered how my mother died, but I never told anyone how she looked at the end." Days later, Miriam attempted to flee the plantation with her younger son. She reached the tree line before Bell caught her. She screamed that the boy wanted to go back to the water, and that Lot 77 was calling him. Bell locked her in her room. That night, every mirror in the house cracked, from the nursery's small handheld glass to the enormous parlor mirror imported from Charleston. Servants found shards all over the floors, all edges pointing inward, toward the house's center. Lot 77 sat in his shack, silent. Miriam did not sleep. She hummed softly until dawn. None of the servants recognized the tune. But one child did. He whispered, "That's the song from the shore." By late spring, Briar Hollow had become a place people avoided. Letters stopped arriving. Visitors turned back at the road. Workers begged to be sold elsewhere. The air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, as if sound did not travel properly. Animals refused to go near Lot 77's shack. Dogs whined and hid. Horses balked violently. Chickens went silent whenever he passed. But the most alarming change affected the human residents. Workers began forgetting basic facts, names of relatives, directions to familiar fields, even their own ages. Some wandered aimlessly, behaving like sleepwalkers. Others repeated phrases they had never spoken before. One elderly worker wept, saying, "I can't remember my mother's face, only his." Children continued drawing the shoreline. Now they added details: a broken pillar protruding from shallow water, a figure with elongated arms, and a symbol resembling intertwined circles. Adults began sketching it too, without realizing. The plantation's blacksmith claimed he saw Lot 77 standing in two places at once, inside his shack, and also behind the barn. A seamstress swore she saw her dead sister's face flash across his features for a moment. When confronted, Lot 77 simply said, All faces return. The overseer decided enough was enough and attempted to bind the young man in heavier chains. But every chain placed on him rusted within hours as if aged decades. Bell became paranoid and violent, convinced his wife and workers were conspiring against him. He accused Lot 77 of sorcery, yet refused to sell him, insisting that doing so would make him appear weak to his peers. The corruption spread beyond memory. Wood rotted overnight, water tasted metallic, visitors felt nauseated and left quickly. Briar Hollow wasn't haunted, it was infected, and the infection had an origin. Records indicate that on the night of May 12th, residents of Briar Hollow witnessed an astronomical impossibility: the moon appearing in 3 positions simultaneously. Some described them as reflections in mist, others as afterimages. But all agreed the effect lasted nearly 10 minutes. During this time, the plantation fell silent, painfully silent. Even breath seemed muffled. Workers described seeing the trees bend toward the house, as though drawn by invisible force. Miriam Bell later claimed the moons aligned with the memories of the dead. As the phenomenon unfolded, Lot 77 walked into the center of the yard and lifted his face toward the sky. Witnesses said his expression changed, not emotion, but recognition, like someone hearing their native language after decades of exile. Then he spoke, not loudly, but every person heard him, even those far away. The shape breaks tonight. Moments later, the plantation erupted in chaos. Windows shattered, children screamed, adults collapsed. People claimed they saw others wearing their own faces, speaking in voices not their own. Some saw loved ones who had died years earlier. Some saw themselves, older or younger, watching from the tree line. One worker ran into the woods and never returned. Another clawed at his own skin, insisting something underneath was trying to come out. Lot 77 stood perfectly still through all of it. When the moons faded and the night returned to normal, 23 people were gone. Bell accused Lot 77 of orchestrating the event. Lot 77 said nothing, but Miriam, trembling, whispered, "He didn't cause it, he allowed it." The infection was accelerating, the boundary between memory and reality had thinned, and the plantation could no longer contain what he was bringing back. Reverend Elias Wren, the choirmaster who had collapsed upon seeing Lot 77 in Memphis, returned unexpectedly to Briar Hollow in June. He had traveled nearly 30 miles on foot. Witnesses described him as gaunt, sleep-deprived, muttering fragments of hymns as if unsure how words worked. He demanded to see Lot 77 immediately. Bell refused. But Wren forced his way into the outbuilding, only to fall to his knees upon seeing the young man. He whispered, "It's older than Scripture." Bell and his overseer dragged Wren out, locking him in the smokehouse until he calmed. That night he wrote a frantic letter, addressed to no one. "The creature is neither man nor spirit. It is a returning, a fragment of what the river swallowed, a memory wearing skin." He insisted the only way to stop the contagion was to disrupt the shape, destroy the vessel before whatever lived behind it fully entered this world. Bell accused him of madness, but Wren was not the only one who believed destruction was necessary. Workers began discussing the same idea independently without prompting. Some claimed dreams instructed them. Others said their dead relatives whispered warnings. The plan formed: burn the outbuilding with Lot 77 inside. End the infection, seal the breach, but when they approached the shack at midnight, torches in hand, they found the door already open. Lot 77 was gone, chains untouched, floor cold. Only a single set of footprints led away toward the river. Wren wept. Bell, enraged, ordered a search, but no one wanted to go near the water. Something had awakened there. The Wolf River, swollen with early summer rain, had always carried debris downstream. Branches, clay, sometimes animals. But in June 1851 it began carrying something else, objects that did not belong to the era. Clay pots with unfamiliar markings, rusted tools shaped like no known plantation equipment, fragments of carved stone depicting faces with no eyes. Bell dismissed these as tricks of flooding, but Reverend Wren recognized the symbols: He had seen them once in an old missionary text describing a pre-colonial ritual known only by its translated name, the returning shape. According to the text, certain drowned individuals could not cross fully into death. Their memories survived, drifting, clinging to the living, searching for vessels in which to reassemble. These memories did not return as ghosts. They returned as reflections given form, not the dead themselves but the idea of them, the shape they once occupied. Wren believed the river had released one such shape, Lot 77, but the returning shape did not possess people. It studied them, it learned their faces, it wore them. Wren explained this to Bell, who struck him and accused him of blasphemy. The workers, however, listened in terrified silence. One elderly woman whispered, "I saw my daughter's eyes in his. She's been gone 20 years." Wren warned that if the shape reached the river again, it would reconnect with whatever memory had formed it, completing its transition. This would make it capable of spreading far beyond Briar Hollow. Bell ordered everyone to remain indoors, but that night the river glowed faintly, like moonlight trapped beneath the surface, and Lot 77 stood at the water's edge, waiting. Bell gathered his men, armed with torches, pistols, and ropes. They marched toward the riverbank, determined to recapture or kill Lot 77. They believed force would restore control over their plantation, their families, their sanity. It was already too late. Workers who accompanied them later described the air near the river as thick like syrup. Some felt pressure on their chests, others heard faint voices calling their names, one voice in particular mimicking dead relatives. When the search party reached the clearing, they froze. Lot 77 stood ankle deep in the river, facing away. The water around him rippled in slow circles as though drawn toward his body. Bell shouted, demanding he return. Lot 77 turned. For the first time, his expression changed, not anger, not fear, recognition. Every man who looked at him claimed they saw a different face. Someone they loved, someone they mourned, someone they failed. One worker dropped his torch, another fell to his knees. Bell fired a shot. The bullet hit the water. Lot 77 was no longer standing where it had been. He now stood behind Bell. He whispered, "All shapes return to the water. Yours will too." Bell screamed and fired wildly. His men fled. Reverend Wren stepped forward holding a wooden cross. He begged the shape to release the living and return to whatever memory it came from. Lot 77 tilted his head, almost curiously. Then he pressed a hand to Wren's chest. Witnesses described a sound like water filling lungs. Wren collapsed, eyes open but seeing nothing. Lot 77 walked deeper into the river. The water rose to his waist, his shoulders, his neck. He did not look back. He dissolved, slowly, like silt disturbed by current. By dawn there was no trace of him, only the faint smell of clay. After the disappearance of Lot 77, Briar Hollow unraveled rapidly. Bell became unrecognizable. He locked himself in his study, emerging only to accuse servants of treason. He insisted his own children were wearing wrong faces. Eventually, he fled into the woods. His body was never recovered. Miriam Bell, found wandering near the nursery, had no memory of her husband. She only repeated the phrase, "He was unfinished," until her voice gave out. She spent the remainder of her life in an asylum. The workers scattered, abandoning the plantation entirely. Some walked to nearby towns, others vanished into the woods, a few traveled north. None would ever speak of 1008. 151 again. The property fell into decay. The outbuildings collapsed, the fields grew wild. Locals avoided the area, insisting the forest was hungry. Children warned one another never to swim in the river, claiming shadows beneath the surface moved without current. Years later, the shoreline shifted, revealing a stone pillar. Like the one drawn by the children months earlier, it bore the same intertwined, circle symbol. Surveyors dismissed it as native ruins. Historians disagreed. No tribe claimed it. No map recorded such a structure. Then came the disappearances. Fishermen vanished. A farmer's daughter was found sleepwalking toward the water. A young boy claimed the man with no face was calling him. The city attempted to drain part of the riverbank for investigation. Machinery broke. Workers quit. The case was abandoned. By the turn of the century, Briar Hollow had become a whisper, an unspoken caution about memory, water, and the things that return. Lot 77 became a myth, a warning, a shape half remembered, but documents remained, and so did the symbol. In the early 20th century, as Memphis expanded, land developers attempted to purchase the Briar Hollow tract. They quickly discovered something troubling. Archived documents relating to the plantation were missing. Court deeds, birth records, medical notes, all gone. Only a heavily redacted confession written by a former member of the buyer's circle survived. We buried the ledger. We buried the testimonies. We buried the truth of the shape we purchased. He described coordinated efforts to suppress the story, including bribing newspapers, burning church records, and intimidating families connected to the event. He wrote, "If the public knew what Lot 77 really was, they would understand that memory itself is fragile, that identity is a temporary mask, that the river remembers more than we do." He warned that the returning shape was not a single being, but a phenomenon. Some memories sink, some drift, some cling, and some rarely crawl back up from the depths. The confession ended with a chilling line, "We did not destroy it, we delayed it." The city sealed the surviving documents in a church facility. For decades, only clergy and select archivists had access. Most refused to open the files. One archivist who examined them wrote, "The symbol feels familiar, like I've drawn it before in childhood." And then in 1934, during demolition of an old orphanage, the rusted iron box was found. The ledger resurfaced, the story resurfaced, and so did the dreams. As we conclude this investigation, we must confront the question that haunts every page of evidence, every witness account, every suppressed document. What was Lot 77? A spirit, a revenant, a memory given flesh, a reflection assembled from lost faces? The answer is uncertain, but the consequences are undeniable. People who encountered him dreamed the same shoreline. Children recognized him without explanation. Adults saw dead loved ones in his face. Animals recoiled, forests bent, mirrors cracked, science failed, faith faltered, and the river responded. If the returning shape is real, it suggests something terrifying. Identity is not a fixed point. It is fluid, permeable, borrowed. The shape we call self may simply be the memory that stuck longest. And all drowned memories, all the people forgotten, lost, discarded, may still be drifting beneath the surface, searching for a vessel, searching for a face to wear, searching for recognition. The Wolf River floods every spring. Debris rises, old things surface. If you ever visit the area once known as Briar Hollow and hear laughter in the distance, if you dream of a shoreline you've never seen, if reflections linger a moment too long, leave. Do not look back, because some memories return, some memories wander, and some memories are still looking for you.